This is Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in Long Beach today, and we are joined by Eric Bauman. He is the chair of the Los Angeles County Democratic Party, vice chair of the California Democratic Party. He is running for the chairmanship of the California Democratic Party in 2017. And I'd like to speak with you, sir. Why don't we start with, the presidential election? How does that sound?
Sounds like a perfect topic.
Let's, for argument's sake, decide that the nominees for president are Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. I want to get your sense. I know you're a partisan, but give us your sense of the landscape.
I'd say it's going to be the most exciting election of a lifetime, probably with the greatest gender gap in history, because Donald Trump's misogynistic statements will serve to turn out more women than anything anybody else could ever do. But this makes one very big presumption, and that is that the elite leadership within the GOP actually will allow him to get the nomination.
So let's, for argument's sake, say he does. I want to get to that point in a little while. It's hard to deny that Donald Trump's numbers with women are upside down, very significantly. And what's most interesting, I recently learned that his serious unfavorables with women are approaching 50%. It's one thing to be probably unfavorable, but very unfavorable. It's hard to get out of that. And so, do these women who would have voted for a Republican, do they stay home and not vote? Do they vote for Hillary Clinton? And what's the distinction between those two events?
So, assuming that there isn't a third-party candidate,
Yes.
which is a point
Fair.
we have to get to, I think many of them will vote for Hillary Clinton. Perhaps the most conservative will not, but then again, the most conservative are in a whole different category. But certainly, any moderate or pro-choice Republican women are certainly going to vote against a misogynist.
But Trump's odd on abortion rights.
But you know what? Here's what's going to happen. There will be television commercials that replay and replay and replay some of his more obnoxious comments to and about women. And that is going to have an impact. Right now, they haven't been able to figure out how to hit him.
But is it though? I mean, there is something about this man. You talk about Teflon. You said Ronald Reagan's the Teflon president. It doesn't seem as if the rules apply to him.
Right. So we can't lose track of the fact, though, that the people who are voting right now, the people who are engaged right now, are the most partisan on the both sides and the most angry on both sides. When you get to the general election, you have this whole swath of Americans who come out and vote. Sometimes the only time they vote in 4 years is that presidential election. These are regular people. And when they hear him call women pigs and other statements that he's made, I think they're going to really challenge that.
I want to talk about ethnic voters. Let's talk about the Latino population. Mr. Trump's numbers with Latinos are severely upside down. I think he's at 80% unfavorable.
Latinos like him, he says so. He says it all the time.
He has said that. So let's say, for argument's sake, those numbers hold. That could be a boon to Mrs. Clinton, but Latinos traditionally have not come out to vote in serious numbers. So what do you make of Mr. Trump? Does he motivate Latinos to register and then vote for the Democrat?
Well, first of all, I would argue the point about Latinos not coming out to vote, particularly in presidential races, they certainly have.
But still, they underperform.
And when there have been threats on the ballot, Latinos have turned out.
Okay.
Ever since Prop 187, there's been an awareness. SB 1070, which is Arizona's equivalent of Prop 187, was used in races all across California to get Latino turnout increased, and it was it was found to be a motivational factor. I think the fact that this man attacks immigrants, talks about building a wall, talks about demanding that Mexico pay for the wall, talks about deporting people and splitting families up, this has an impact. And what's interesting, for so many Latinos, immigration is not necessarily their number one issue. Oftentimes it is economic issues and academic issues. How do I get my kids through school? How do I support my family? But he has made immigration the number one issue.
I want to ask about African American voters. No question that in the Democratic primaries, African American voters have been very loyal to Secretary Clinton. There's also no question that President Obama had huge margins run up with African American voters, 90%, 95%. We are seeing polls which indicate that African Americans are supporting Donald Trump in the 20% range. That could be very troubling in some very important states for Mrs. Clinton.
I haven't seen a single reputable national poll that shows him polling 20%.
He's doing better than Mr. Romney. He's doing better than Mr. McCain.
But remember, you're looking at polls that are not general election polls, so they're polling black Republicans. Absolutely. You're not seeing this in general election polling. We have to remember that when you do primary polling, you're polling a different set of voters.
Right, so you're not concerned, you think African Americans will come home to the Democrats?
African Americans historically vote in excess of 87% for Democrats.
I want to talk about white men. White men have not been voting for Mrs. Clinton during these primaries. White men have been voting in very significant numbers for Mr. Trump. The irony is white men were for Mrs. Clinton in 2008 when she was running against Mr. Obama, but yet Mr. Sanders seems to be doing better with white men, at least on the Democratic side, and Mr. Trump absolutely on the Republican side. Are you concerned about white men, blue-collar white men?
Look, Democrats have struggled with white men in particular for some time now. It's not a new phenomenon. It goes back to when Bill Clinton ran for president.
Why?
Because white men tend to have the greatest economic insecurity, tend towards have a greater likelihood to be more conservative in certain viewpoints.
Have economic insecurity, couldn't one argue that the Democratic platform is more supportive?
100%. And it is one of those political phenomena where you see people literally vote against their own self-interest. You literally see people vote for the person who vetoed the bill to increase the minimum wage. And there are lots of explanations posited about it. I don't really know what the real true answer to it is, but at the end of the day, I think the reality is that Democrats start with a good advantage in the presidential race.
If I may. Look, Democrats have won, I think, 240 electoral votes in every state since 1992. They start with 240. But does this electoral map get thrown into disarray because of Mr. Trump? Does he become competitive in Pennsylvania and in New York and in other places, Virginia, which seem to be trending Democratic?
That's a question we'll have to see. I tend to think our message is better than his. I tend to think that average Americans will be repelled and repulsed by his anger, by his threats, by his bullying.
The flip side, does Mrs. Clinton become competitive in states that really weren't thought to be competitive? Is she all of a sudden competitive in, Indiana, North Carolina, Georgia? States that have flirted with Democrats in the past, maybe voted once or twice Democratic in presidential elections, but with more Latino voters, with women. Could she start to pluck off some red states?
I think Democratic turnout is going to be incredible. I think if voters who are turning out, new voters who are turning out, many of those new voters who are Sanders voters,
they come home to Mrs.
Some
Clinton?
come home. Some significant number of them come home. And, I always think about when Barack Obama won in 2008, he won in great part on the strength of the day's millennial voters. And when he ran for re-election in 2012, they said, the young voters are not going to turn out again. They're not going to turn out for him. They actually turned out at a 16% higher rate.
His name is Eric Bauman. He will be back. He is chair of the Los Angeles County Democratic Party. My name is Brad Pomerance, and this is Charter Local Edition.